I don't want to see 60. See, if I get like 60.
Vinny Paz was once the face of grit, glory, and pure boxing drama. The man who fought his way to 5 world titles and made one of the greatest comebacks in sports history. Inside the ring, he was all fire and fists. Outside, he was the loud, unapologetic Rhode Island brawler fans couldn't get enough of. But fast forward to today, and this figure isn't as victorious anymore. At 62 years old, life has thrown him punches he couldn't dodge. Come along as we unravel the tragedy that had befallen the greatest of all time in boxing. Vinny Pazienza, known to fans simply as Vinny Paz, was born on December 16, 1962, in Cranston, Rhode Island. From an early age, he showed the kind of restless energy and fighting spirit that later defined his career. Beyond just being a sport, boxing made him stand out. By the time he turned professional in 1983, he had already built a reputation as a tough, aggressive fighter who was willing to go toe-to-toe with anyone. His early years in the ring were marked by a fast rise through the lightweight division. In 1987, just 4 years into his professional career, Paz captured his first world title, the IBF Lightweight Championship, by defeating Greg Haugen in a closely fought match. That victory put him on the boxing map. Although he later lost the belt back to Haugen in a rematch, the defeat didn't stop him. Instead, it pushed him to keep climbing, moving up in weight and challenging himself against bigger, stronger opponents. By 1991, Paz had reinvented himself as a junior middleweight, where he pulled off another career-defining moment. He claimed the WBA junior middleweight title after beating Gilbert Deal, proving he could succeed in more than one division. He had the adaptability, skill, and determination to compete across weight classes, which was a rare feat in boxing. Known for his relentless pressure and fearless approach, Paz was never the type of fighter to coast through a match. His bouts often turned into brawls, with the crowd roaring as he traded heavy shots with opponents. Even when he wasn't the favorite, his willingness to push forward made him a fan favorite. This style earned him matches against some of the sport's top names, including Roger Mayweather and Hector Camacho. But as every boxing fan knows, the story of a fighter doesn't end with the final bell of a championship match. For Vinny Paz, the road ahead was about to take an unexpected turn, and while fans celebrated his past victories, they had no idea the kind of battle he faced that weighed on him in his 60s. The unforeseen tragedy. Boxing is one of the most physically demanding sports in the world. Every fight is a test of the body's limits. The sport's very nature is to hit and be hit, and over time, those hits add up. 60 professional fights mean thousands of punches absorbed in training and competition. Even for the strongest athletes, the body can only take so much before the wear begins to show. The physical toll often begins quietly. At first, it's just a sore shoulder here, a stiff neck there, or an aching back after sparring. But as the years go on, the damage becomes harder to ignore. Fighters deal with chronic pain from old injuries, reduced mobility, and in some cases, the effects of repeated blows to the head. The hands, once their primary tools, may become a source of constant discomfort from fractures and sprains sustained over the years. But the impact isn't only physical. Mentally, the life of a boxer carries its own weight. The adrenaline and purpose that come with training for a fight don't last forever. For many, the struggle comes later, when the cheers fade and the body can't respond the way it once did. Aging as a former athlete brings its own emotional battles. There is the pressure to stay relevant, the memories of past glory, and the challenge of finding a new identity outside the ring. It's a gradual, often invisible toll, built over years of pushing the body past its natural limits. And then there are the moments when the damage isn't gradual at all, moments when it comes suddenly, violently, and without warning. For Vinny Paz, that moment came in 1991. At the time, Paz was riding high in his career. Just months earlier, he had captured the WBA junior middleweight title by defeating Gilbert Deal, marking another milestone in his climb through boxing's ranks. He was 28 years old, a two-division world champion, and still in his prime. The future looked bright. Then, one night in Warwick, Rhode Island, everything changed. Paz was driving home when his car was involved in a near-fatal accident. The crash left him with devastating injuries, 2 fractured vertebrae and a dislocated vertebra in his neck. The damage was so severe that doctors told him bluntly that he might never walk again, let alone fight. The diagnosis was crushing. To stabilize his spine, surgeons placed him in a metal halo brace, a device that attached to his skull with 4 screws. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was agony. The halo had to stay on for months, holding his neck in place while the bones healed. Sleeping was a challenge. Moving was a challenge. Even sitting for too long brought pain. For a man whose life revolved around movement, speed, and agility, the restrictions felt like mental shackles. The sudden shift from being an elite athlete to barely being able to move without assistance was a brutal shock. And then there was the fear. If the doctors were right, his boxing career was over. The sport he had devoted his life to was being ripped away, not by a loss in the ring, but by a twist of fate on the road. But Vinny Paz was never one to follow the expected path. Instead of accepting the prognosis, he made a decision that would define him. He refused to believe it was over. Against medical advice, he began training while still wearing the halo. At first, it was just light exercises, with careful movements to rebuild his strength. Then, as the weeks went by, the workouts became more intense. He lifted weights. He hit the heavy bag. He pushed himself past the limits most people would have accepted. His determination bordered on recklessness, but it was fueled by the belief that he could come back. And after 13 months of relentless rehab and training, that's exactly what he did. In December 1992, he stepped back into the ring against Luis Santana and won. It was one of the most remarkable comebacks in sports history. The man who had been told he might never walk again was once again standing in the ring, gloves raised, doing the thing he loved most. The victory wasn't just on the scorecards. It was in proving the experts wrong, in reclaiming his identity, and in showing the world that he wouldn't be defined by an accident. Over the next several years, Paz continued to fight, adding more wins to his record and even capturing additional titles. His story became one of resilience, the kind of comeback tale that inspired documentaries, interviews, and fans worldwide. In 2016, his journey was immortalized in the film Bleed for This, with Miles Teller portraying him. But while the public celebrated the triumph, it's important to remember that the comeback didn't erase the cost. Spinal injuries of that magnitude don't simply disappear, even when the person recovers enough to compete. Chronic pain, stiffness, and the lingering risk of further injury likely followed him for the rest of his career and beyond. The halo may have come off, but the physical and psychological marks of that crash would remain. The accident was more than just a near-death experience. It was a direct threat to everything Vinny Paz had built. It put his livelihood, his passion, and his very sense of self in jeopardy overnight. And while he emerged from it with one of the most celebrated comebacks in sports, the road there was paved with suffering most people never saw. In many ways, it remains the most defining challenge of his life. Yes, he beat the odds. Yes, he returned to the ring and added to his legacy. But the accident was a reminder that no amount of toughness or training can make a person invincible. It was a fight he couldn't win with punches. It required a different kind of strength. Even now, decades later, the shadow of that crash hangs over his story. Fans remember the victory, but for Vinny Paz himself, the real battle may have been in those long, painful months with the halo, staring down the possibility of a life without boxing. But the accident wasn't the only thing that threatened his boxing career. The wrecking scandals. Vinny Paz, once celebrated for his iron will in the ring and his unbelievable comeback after a near-fatal accident, has never been a stranger to headlines. But away from the bright lights and roaring crowds, there's another side of his story, the scandals that have followed him in retirement. Some were splashed across newspapers, others passed around like gossips, a few of them surfacing online. None of them took away his legacy as one of boxing's most determined fighters, but they did cast shadows on his later years. The first major scandal erupted in 2018, and it wasn't about boxing at all. It was about a deeply personal and troubling accusation. That year, Vinny was charged in a case involving domestic assault. Police reports stated that an argument between him and his girlfriend at the time had turned physical. According to the allegations, the situation escalated in a way that concerned the authorities enough to bring legal charges. For a man who had built his public image on resilience and determination, this was a very different kind of fight. The legal outcome was a 1-year suspended sentence, which meant he wouldn't serve time in prison as long as he complied with certain conditions. Those conditions included probation and counseling, steps aimed at addressing the nature of the incident and ensuring it wouldn't happen again. Throughout it all, Vinny maintained his innocence, insisting he hadn't done what was claimed. But even without a prison term, the damage to his reputation was undeniable. Fans who once saw him as an unshakable hero now had to reconcile that image with serious allegations of violence. If that wasn't enough, later that same year, Vinny's name surfaced in another legal matter. This time, it wasn't about a romantic relationship. It was about a dispute that reportedly began over a theft. The details were far murkier than the domestic case. Reports suggested that Vinny was accused of assaulting a man after accusing him of stealing something from him. Unlike the first case, the resolution of this one was less clear. Publicly available records didn't provide a detailed ending as to whether it was dropped, settled, or led to further penalties remains uncertain. Still, having 2 separate assault-related allegations in the same year was enough to fuel speculation about Vinny's personal life and behavior off the clock. The press painted a picture of a retired athlete struggling with temper, trust, or both. And while those who knew him personally sometimes defended his character, the headlines didn't need much help in crafting a narrative. Beyond these legal disputes, there was another incident. This one didn't involve police reports, but still managed to stir conversation. Sometime after his retirement, an unverified Reddit post appeared, written by someone claiming to have encountered Vinny in a bar. According to this anonymous account, the former champion had been drinking heavily and behaved inappropriately. There was no photographic or video evidence, and no follow-up from mainstream media, so the claim stayed in the realm of rumor. But in the age of the internet, even an unproven story can leave a small stain on a public figure's name. What made these scandals stand out wasn't just their content, but the contrast they created with Vinny's earlier image. This was the same man who had inspired fans worldwide by refusing to quit after a broken neck. The same man whose grit had been immortalized in the film Bleed for This. Now, instead of comeback victories, he was appearing in headlines for court cases and accusations. It's worth noting that none of these scandals completely derailed his public appearances. Vinny still showed up at events, signings, and even interviews. He still had loyal fans who either believed his side of the story or felt that his accomplishments outweighed his personal missteps. But each time his name reappeared in a scandal, it chipped away at the unshakable hero image he'd once enjoyed. The 2018 domestic case, in particular, had a lasting echo. Even though Vinny didn't serve jail time, being ordered to attend counseling and complete probation kept the incident in the public record. For some, that served as proof of wrongdoing. For others, it was just the legal system ensuring all sides were addressed. Either way, it meant the story lingered longer than a quick tabloid headline. As for the alleged assault over the theft dispute, the lack of a clear public resolution created a different kind of problem. Without a definitive ending, people were left to fill in the blanks themselves, and speculation can be far more damaging than facts. Some assumed guilt, others saw it as a heated misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But either way, it became part of the "trouble follows Vinny" narrative. The anecdotal Reddit story may have been the smallest in terms of real-world consequences, but it still gave out the same effect. A man once celebrated for discipline and toughness, now being discussed in terms of questionable behavior. And while the internet has no shortage of false or exaggerated claims, the very existence of such a story in a public forum meant it could be linked to his name for anyone searching online. Still, looking at the broader picture, these scandals, while damaging, didn't erase Vinny Paz's legacy in boxing. They did, however, complicate it. They added layers to how he was perceived. For some fans, that made him more relatable. For others, it was a disappointment they couldn't come to terms with. What's undeniable is that Vinny's life after boxing has been as eventful and as public as his career in it. His triumphs were legendary, but his stumbles were equally public. The scandals of 2018, along with the scattered personal rumors, became part of his post-ring story. They didn't define it entirely, but they did ensure that the narrative of Vinny Paz was no longer just about grit, glory, and an impossible comeback. It was also about the messy, unpredictable reality of life after the final bell. However, how things shook out from here didn't bother him. He's been there for a good time, yet somehow, at 62, he's still standing, longer than the doctors predicted, longer than his critics expected, and longer than he once believed himself. And if you think the real story is just about him stepping into the ring, you're missing the bigger fight, the ultimate win. By the time most men hit 62, they're slowing down and maybe spoiling grandkids, but not Vinny Paz. In an interview, the former 5-time world champion talks about life as if it's a fight he's already won. He's not planning the future so much as enjoying whatever's left. "I've had a blessed life," he said, with the conviction of a man who's fought, literally and figuratively, for every scrap of life. For Paz, 2025 has been a victory lap. He had just been inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, joining the immortals of his sport. He's already had a Hollywood movie made about him, Bleed for This, and now a major documentary is in production. To him, those were not just accolades. They were the confirmation that all the pain, the sweat, the broken bones, and the near-death moments were worth it. Paz credits his toughness to his parents, Angelo and Louise. His mother was a hairdresser who once broke her leg carrying groceries, then walked 2 blocks, climbed stairs, and cooked dinner before admitting she was in pain. His father, a moneymaker who kept the wrong crowd at bay, taught him discipline and kept him away from the mob life that was all too easy to fall into in Rhode Island. "My father was on me like a glove," Paz says. "That's why I stayed away from those guys. I didn't like them." Boxing wasn't his parents' first choice for him, but once they saw he was serious, they were 210% behind him. As an amateur, he fought around 100 bouts, but failing to beat Pernell Whitaker kept him out of the 1984 Olympics. By then, the pro ranks were calling anyway. Ask most retired fighters about their rivals, and you'll hear about mutual respect forged in the ring. Not with Greg Haugen or Dana Rosenblatt. The mention of their names still draws a visceral reaction from Paz decades later. "Oh man, I hate him," Paz says of Haugen. "I still hate him. I hate the little bitch." When asked if he could ever imagine sharing a meal with Haugen, Paz is incredulous. "Out for dinner, I'll shove a steak down his throat." Rosenblatt doesn't fare much better in his recollections. "If that kid walks in this ring right now, I'm choking him out," Paz says, before grinning like he knows he's being outrageous, but not entirely joking. Over a career spanning 60 pro bouts, Paz faced a murderer's row of talent. Roberto Duran, Roy Jones Jr., Hector Camacho, Lloyd Honeyghan, Harold Graham, Roger Mayweather. Each fight added another layer to his story. He recalls Mayweather as nearly finishing what that weight cut had started, sending Paz to the emergency room in a haze so bright and peaceful he thought he was dying. Only his father's voice in the ER champ, "Don't die," brought him back. Duran, he says, hit harder than anyone. "Every time he hit me, it was like a big concrete thud." They hated each other before their fights, but became friends afterward. Jones was faster than lightning. Camacho was unbelievably elusive. And Glenwood Brown, though lesser known, earned a special place in Paz's heart for their toe-to-toe war. His proudest moment remains that win over Gilbert Deal for the junior middleweight title. "By far, the greatest fight I ever had," he says. And then, days later, the broken neck. That cruel twist might have ended another man's career, but for Paz, it only made the win mean more. There's something in the way Paz talks about his career that makes you think he's been ready for the final bell for a long time. Not because he's tired, but because he's satisfied. He had lived through the high of world titles and the low of nearly dying. He had seen his heroes up close and gone to war with them. He felt the bright light of the ring and the darkness of the hospital bed, and he had come out smiling. Yes, he still calls himself the champ with zero irony, but there's also a rare acceptance. I'm tickled pink with my career. I think I did it all, he says, and in his mind, that's enough. The International Boxing Hall of Fame wasn't just an honor for Paz, it was the final confirmation that his journey mattered. From the kid running 2 miles after watching Rocky, cracking eggs into a glass like Stallone, to the man with 50 professional wins and 5 world titles, the road has been long, violent, and unlikely. But if you ask him, it's been exactly what it was meant to be. I'm a former 5-time world champion fighter, he says. I take that to heart, and I let it guide me through the world today. I'm lucky. So what's your take on the way he's handled both the punches inside the ring and the blows life's thrown at him outside it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more inspiring journeys. We'll see you in the next video.